Let's talk about the power of prayer. I'm not going to argue that you're delusional. I want to make the point that your conviction in the power of prayer is possible, even if prayer has no power. To explain how it is that prayer can appear to work, even if there's no God answering those prayers. My explanation is an analogy to the cycle of a car engine. I call it the self-reinforcing delusion engine. The prayer self-reinforcing delusion engine consists of 4 basic stages: the trigger of the next prayer, results evaluation, memory storage of results, and efficacy audit. From number 1 through number 4 and back to number 1 again for another cycle, this engine iterates stronger and stronger with each pass, maintaining and building its own momentum, sort of like a car engine. Stage 1. Trigger of the next prayer. This is the most simple stage of the cycle. It's when you are triggered to pray, whether you're trying out prayer for the first time, or it's a regular habit. The engine cycle starts here. If we're comparing this engine to a car engine, it would be roughly equivalent to the spark plug. Stage 2. Results evaluation. After you've prayed whatever it is you're praying for, the next step is seeing what happens. The results are considered and placed into one of 3 categories: success, neutral, and failure. Each of these categories has a threshold for whether a particular prayer result falls into one as opposed to another. For instance, let's say that you've prayed asking for a raise at work. If you get that raise, that would clearly be a success. What if you didn't get that raise, but instead got something else? You won money from a scratch ticket, say $2,000, and you used it to pay off some credit card debt. It wasn't a raise, but it freed up interest that you were paying per month. So it's kinda like a raise, right? Depending on your interpretation of events, that might actually qualify as a success too, even though it's not exactly what you prayed for. The effect of this interpretation is that now you're accepting a much broader range of possibilities that qualify as successes. The ratios of thresholds between the 3 categories is now much more lopsided towards the success category. Likewise, if a result does not appear to match your belief that prayer works, you'll have ways of explaining them away. Do any of these statements sound familiar? God sometimes says no. God works in mysterious ways. You can't understand God's plan. God has other plans for me. You can't test God. What you're doing here is essentially dismissing failures. You're shifting them from the failure category into the neutral category. You've rationalized why the failures aren't really failures. This shrinks the threshold for failure quite a bit. With these 2 threshold alterations, successes appear to be bountiful, and failures are few. Those rationalizations might make sense to you, particularly in your doctrine where you're not allowed to test God. However, I would point out that none of these rationalizations are testable or falsifiable. They're merely unevidenced assertions that, from an external observer's perspective, appear to be excuses to cover up problematic areas of your prayer model. There are 6 basic ways that prayer can appear to work, even when it's not. The first is coincidence. For some reason, many theists dismiss coincidence. The fact is, there are so many potential coincidences that can happen on a daily basis that it would be quite odd if none occurred. The vast majority of potential coincidences are unknown to us until they happen. Do you believe that Paul the octopus is psychic? If you believe coincidences don't exist, then that would be a likely conclusion. This octopus in question correctly predicted the results of 8 games of Germany's matches in the 2010 World Cup. How else other than psychic powers do you think Paul predicted the outcomes, you ask? Do you think it just happened by chance? Well, yes. Why not? The one thing you must understand about humans is that we are staggeringly pathetic at assessing probability. Without the discipline of math to objectively analyze events, we'd be left with our intuitions, which fail miserably. That's because we are so often not in possession of all the facts, or all the possibilities, or all the nuances of every cause and effect that can influence the outcome. The probability of someone correctly predicting the outcome of 8 games by flipping a coin is 1 in 256. That's not too bad of a chance of getting it right, for starters. Now multiply that against all the other people who are predicting games in different ways. Now multiply that against all the different games going on in that year for that country. Now multiply that against all the different countries. Now multiply that against all the different years, say the past 20 years. The occurrence of someone guessing all the games correctly isn't just likely, we should be utterly swamped with them, and only through mere chance. Paul the Octopus just happened to be the one predictor that won, and we haven't been aware of all the failures from the others. An animal failing to predict game results is not newsworthy, so we don't hear about it, but since you hadn't considered the full scope of events, your assessment of probability was inaccurate. The second way prayer can appear to work without a god is praying for something that's likely to happen. If your wedding is tomorrow and you check the weather report and it says 20% chance of rain, and you decide to pray that you don't get rained on, and you don't, is that really answered prayer? How often do you pray for things that are unlikely? How often do those prayers come true? Many theists, with myself having had this mentality as well, want to be humble about prayer. God isn't a genie. He isn't a vending machine. I found myself praying for things that were fairly likely in the first place, as streamlining the possibility that my day would go well. Unfortunately, this has a way of exaggerating the success threshold I was explaining earlier. Now, even more prayer results count as successes. The third way prayer can appear to work without a god is making it happen. If you pray for a hamburger and then you cook yourself one, does that count as answered prayer? This example may be absurd, but that's for contrast. Let's consider a more common example. You badly want a raise. You pray for a raise, and you get that raise. Does that count as answered prayer? Have you considered that prayer was not the cause? This is where the phrase correlation does not equal causation applies. Now, it's not particularly wrong or irrational to deduce that flipping a light switch causes the light bulb to turn on, but you must allow for the possibility that you are incorrectly perceiving the chain of events. When it comes to how lights work, we can examine and investigate the mechanism in order to know that the events between the light switch and the light bulb isn't mere correlation, but rather causation. We can't do that with prayer. When you were praying for a raise, were you also working hard for a raise? It might have been that the hard work is what paid off, instead of prayer. You were doing both at the same time, and for some reason you decided to attribute the success to the prayer instead of the hard work. That's where the correlation manifests, even if it's not causation. God helps those who help themselves, you interject. By mere decree of an untestable, unfalsifiable statement, you've chosen one possibility over another. Do you think you are correct in doing that? The fact remains, you can be doing multiple things at once to achieve a goal, whether reality-based or prayer-based. How do you know which approach was the successful one? The fourth way prayer can appear to work without a god is the placebo effect. If a doctor gives you a sugar pill, tells you that it's headache-relieving medicine, you may believe him or her and relax, knowing that your pain is about to go away, instead of being stressed over it. That relaxation causes the headache to subside. In the end, you were essentially tricked into making the result come true, instead of the supposed medicine doing anything. Strangely, this is also one that theists dismiss out of hand. In reality, prayer can have the same effect. If you're praying for a good job interview tomorrow, if you strongly believe in prayer, that may give you some confidence, which makes your job interview go better. If you're trying to quit smoking and you pray for strength to get through the withdrawals, that may cause you to think you have more power and ends up helping. Many of these things are possible without a god answering prayer at all. The fifth way prayer can appear to work without a god is external data. A big part of why you believe in prayer is because you've talked with other people who believe in prayer too. You compare results and you come to a consensus that prayer works. You're only hearing the success stories from your friends. You're making a judgment about the efficacy of prayer based on a quick tally of the information available, even if it's heavily biased information. It goes right back to Paul the Octopus. You aren't aware of the true failure rate, but only the successes, even if there's no god answering them.